What's up guys, today I have a brand new guide for one of the community favorites, Hu Tao. She's loved by a lot of the community, and I know a large portion of players who weren't around during the 1.3 patch are eagerly looking to pull for her on her first rerun banner. She's a great main DPS character that's wonderful from C0 all the way to C6, making her a great option for all types of players in Genshin Impact. With that being said, there have been a couple new options for Hu Tao that have been introduced in the game since 1.3, and today I'm going to provide you the latest information regarding what's good and what's not good with Hu Tao. As usual, this guide will cover the best and most popular artifacts, weapons, and team comps for Hu Tao at this moment. Without further ado, let's get this guide rolling. Before I talk about Hu Tao's build, since this is a comprehensive guide, I want to cover one of the super important things regarding how to play Hu Tao for those who haven't been around Genshin for a long time or simply don't know how to play Hu Tao. I'm sure you already know that Hu Tao's main gimmick is that she can make her attacks deal pyro damage with her elemental ability, but what you may not know is that depending on your constellations, Hu Tao has two different playstyles. Starting with the easier playstyle, we have the Hu Tao shenanigans if you have C1 or higher. Essentially, Hu Tao is a character who heavily relies on charge attacks, and with this constellation, whenever your attacks are infused with pyro from her skill, there will be no stamina cost for charge attacking. So what we want to do with C1 is to quickly normal attack into a charge attack, then dash cancel the charge attack and repeat this process a whole bunch of times. To pull this off, the input is super simple. Just hold down the charge attack button and dash before Hu Tao travels the full distance of her charge attack. The charge attack is extremely powerful in terms of damage, but it also has a lot of time at the end of the animation where we can't move around, leaving Hu Tao quite vulnerable. This is why we want to use the benefit of C1 to use our extra stamina to dash around before we reach this point. However, at C0, dashing around so many times will drain your stamina bar quicker than your Primogem savings when pulling for Staff of Thoma. But good news for you, I'm here to explain the C0 Hu Tao playstyle, which will not require you to spend most of your stamina on dashing around. Instead, C0 Hu Tao relies on animation cancelling her charge attack with a jump, which does make her a little more difficult to play but definitely feels rewarding once you get the rhythm down. It's the exact same thing as before, where now we normal attack into a charge attack and then jump before the charge attack travels its full distance. If you can't get the jump cancel quick enough to where it looks like what you're seeing on screen right now, don't worry, I'm here to help you. Because Hu Tao's attacks have a slightly different animation during her pyro infusion, this gives us a handy visual cue to time your jumps. When Hu Tao's spear reaches the end of her swing, that's the time you want to press the jump button. Essentially, what's happening here is that we are buffering a command for Hu Tao to jump while we're already holding down the attack button for Hu Tao to charge attack. What this does is start the charge attack, then immediately have Hu Tao jump after the attack goes through, which cuts off the ending animation of the charge attack. This gets us back in control of Hu Tao a little quicker so that we can unleash damage at a faster rate. I can't emphasize this enough, but do your best to master Hu Tao's jump cancels if you're at C0 and you're looking to improve her damage tenfold. There are other combos that people like to suggest, like 2 normal attacks into a charge attack, but the reason I chose to explain just 1 normal attack into a charge attack is because it balances the idea of optimized damage without being terribly difficult to pull off. If you don't really care and just love to admire how pretty Hu Tao's visual effects are, then by all means you can simply just normal attack and stare at the pretty effects. I won't lie, I used to do the exact same thing, so I fully support anyone pulling for Hu Tao just to have a little bit of fun. Anyways, the goal of this section was to provide some useful information for those looking to optimize their gameplay, and hopefully I delivered. Now it's time to move into the fun stuff with artifacts and weapons. Alright, with artifacts, this is where all the new builds for Hu Tao come into play. There have been not 1, but 2 new artifact sets that have changed the way that we want to look at Hu Tao's builds. Starting out with Hu Tao's best in slot, surprisingly we have a choice between 2 sets now. These 2 sets are the 4-set Crimson Witch of Flames and the 4-set Shimenawa's Reminiscence. You're probably wondering, how do I choose between these 2 sets? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. Across a wide variety of scenarios, the 2 sets are on average close to each other in damage. What this means is that the choice really depends on how you like to play Hu Tao. If you're really into charge attack cancels, whether it be through the dash or jump methods that I talked about beforehand, then the 4-set Shimenawa's Reminiscence is definitely the set for you. The whopping 50% damage bonus to normal and charge attacks is ridiculous, considering that Hu Tao already has really good damage multipliers herself. On the other hand, if you like to use your elemental burst often and see big melt or vaporized numbers, then the 4-set Crimson Witch of Flames definitely has the advantage. You might have noticed that Shimenawa's gives virtually no bonus to Hu Tao outside of her normal and charge attacks. Crimson Witch is a lot less lopsided in terms of damage distribution between her elemental burst and charge attacks, meaning that this set is perfect for players who just want to enjoy Hu Tao and not think as much. Other than these two main options, we have 3 alternative options that are also viable on Hu Tao. The first combination is the 2-set Crimson Witch of Flames with the 2-set Tenacity of the Millith. This is another super balanced set that will benefit Hu Tao wherever she goes, but it's not quite as good as the full 4-set Crimson Witch of Flames. Another combination that's not as good as the 4-set Crimson Witch of Flames is the 2-set Wanderer's Troop with the 2-set Crimson Witch of Flames. While this combination still works wonderfully, I just like to think of it as a poor person's version of the full Crimson Witch effect. And lastly, the 4-set Retracing Bulllight is another solid option on Hu Tao. This set has fallen severely out of popularity since the introduction of the 4-set Shimenawa's Reminiscence, but that doesn't mean it's bad per se. Just keep in mind that this set can only be run with shielders, and even then it's not mandatory. The 3 characters that I like to run as shielder for Hu Tao are Zhongli, Diona, and Thoma. As for Hu Tao's artifact stats, they are pretty straightforward. If you think of Hu Tao as your standard Pyro DPS, but instead of attack percent we focus HP percent, then her build becomes really simple. In the Sands we want HP percent or EM, in the Goblet we want Pyro damage bonus, and in the Circlet we want crit rate or crit damage. EM in the Sand slot is only really if you have a ton of HP already through substats and through a weapon like Staff of Thoma, so 99% of the time you're going to want to pick HP percent. As for artifact substats, we want to focus the same stats with crit rate, crit damage, and HP percent. To add on a few more options in substats, EM and energy recharge are always going to be nice for Hu Tao as well. Moving into weapons, there hasn't really been many changes compared to Hu Tao's artifacts. Before I start, let's tackle the elephant in the room. Yes, Staff of Thoma is the best in slot weapon for Hu Tao, no questions asked. But that's not what you're here for, as evident from the thumbnail. If you're looking for the best polearms outside of Staff of Thoma, look no further. Starting at the number 1 option, or technically number 2 option, we have the Dragon's Bane. This weapon is a little bit difficult to build around, but the ceiling for this weapon is absolutely ridiculous. EM is a surprisingly valuable stat on Hu Tao since we want to vaporize and melt most of her damage. Not to mention, the passive is also a perfect fit when paired with her most popular teammate Xingqiu. Right next to Dragon's Bane, we have the Deathmatch. The ceiling on this weapon is a little lower compared to Dragon's Bane, but let me tell you, this weapon makes Hu Tao super easy to build. Unlike Dragon's Bane, which is actually really difficult to build around, the 36.8% crit rate from the Deathmatch combined with her crit damage Ascension makes for a deadly combo. This weapon will definitely be one of the best $10 investments to make for Hu Tao if you don't have Staff of Thoma. In the number 3 spot, we have Primordial Jade Wing Spear. Believe it or not, Primordial Jade Wing Spear is actually worse than the Deathmatch on Hu Tao because she doesn't really care about base attack. Not only is the crit rate on this spear worse, but the passive is also a little more difficult to use for Hu Tao. However, despite me trashing this weapon compared to Deathmatch, I don't want you guys to think that this is a bad weapon either. It's still a really good option, just a lot more niche since Deathmatch is a cheaper option for most players, and other polearm users will probably want your Primordial Jade Wing Spear. In the number 4 spot, we have the Blackcliff Pole. This weapon is the best completely free-to-play option we have for Hu Tao at the moment. The same thing can be said about this weapon as I just explained with Primordial Jade Wing Spear. Although the weapon does provide a crit stat, the passive and base attack just aren't as useful on Hu Tao compared to other polearm characters. In the number 5 spot, we have another completely free-to-play option with the White Tassel. At Refinement rank 5, this weapon gets pretty close to the power level of Blackcliff Pole, which is quite promising for a 3-star weapon. For those just starting out or don't have enough star glitter for Blackcliff Pole, go open some chests and get yourself an R5 White Tassel. This is definitely the best budget option for Hu Tao. And beyond that, there aren't really many other options for Hu Tao. There are a few other options like Lithic Spear, Scoured Spine, and Vortex Vanquisher, which I do think can work on Hu Tao, but overall provide either the wrong stats or just not enough compared to the previous polearms that I mentioned. I would definitely approach these 3 weapons or any other weapon that I didn't mention with the utmost caution. Okay, so that was a lot of information to soak in, so before I get into the teams for Hu Tao, let's take a break and look at my own Hu Tao build. Don't worry, as promised, my build also does not have Staff of Thoma, so if you guys are curious as to what a build looks like without Staff of Thoma, here's what it looks like. Now that you've seen my Hu Tao build, let's talk about some of the popular team archetypes for Hu Tao in patch 2.2. To kick off the section with Hu Tao teams, let's start with the classic options, then move into some of the new and rising teams towards the end. You'll notice that for all of these teams, Xingqiu is a staple unit to pair with Hu Tao no matter where you use her. These 2 characters are like 2 peas in a pod, so definitely build up Xingqiu if you haven't built him yet. Anyways, our first team consists of the Hu Tao plus Xingqiu power combo with the classic duo of Albedo and Zhongli. With this specific double Geo setup, we get the Zhongli Resistance Shred, Albedo Elemental Mastery buff, and the Geo Resonance to buff the reactions between Hu Tao and Xingqiu. This is one of the oldest and strongest teams with Hu Tao, but it's also very expensive in terms of units. Simply swapping one of the Geo units for more accessible characters like Ningguang or Noelle will plummet the DPS of this team. For this reason, instead of swapping out a Geo character, let's talk about a similar team that does not include either of the 2 Geo 5-star characters. Making some slight modifications to the first team, we still have Hu Tao and Xingqiu, but now instead of Albedo in the 3rd slot, we have Rosaria. For the last slot, you can still choose Zhongli if you happen to have him, but the other option here is going to be Diona. Now, instead of running the double 5-star Geo characters, we can run double 4-star Cryo units and end up with a team that still performs pretty well. In an ideal setup, what happens here is Xingqiu will occasionally freeze enemies with the help of Rosaria and Diona. This allows Hu Tao to get melt hits for ×2 damage rather than vaporize hits for ×1.5 damage. We want to use Rosaria specifically because she has a phenomenal elemental burst for extra AoE damage, and she also provides additional crit rate for Hu Tao. Diona serves 2 purposes in this team. She provides a shield and she also generates cryo particles for Rosaria. Last but not least, we have Hu Tao plus Thoma. This combination may come as a surprise to some players, but with a little bit of new information thanks to his hangout event, Thoma looks to be a pretty solid support for Hu Tao. The team consists of Hu Tao, Xingqiu, Thoma, and an Animo unit with the 4-set Viridescent in the last slot. You already know a lot about Xingqiu, so let's talk a little bit about Thoma. He provides a few things to this team, notably a reliable shield, Pyro Energy for Hu Tao, and the Pyro Resonance for extra attack percent. The biggest concern to most people is that Thoma's Elemental Burst will react with Xingqiu's Elemental Burst and end up stealing reactions from Hu Tao. But that's actually not necessarily the case from what we know so far. Thanks to his hangout event, we now know that Thoma's Elemental Burst has a 2.5 second internal cooldown. This means that only every other wave of flames will actually trigger a reaction. This information is huge because at this point Thoma looks to be a stellar support for Hu Tao, since he will not take away much from Hu Tao's vaporize reactions. Of course, this is all initial testing, and once myself and others do some more thorough testing, things may end up changing. For now, if you're skeptical or simply don't want to use Thoma, we can revert back to another double pyro comp by using Xiangling in this slot. In this case, we don't mind who actually procs Vaporize because both Xiangling and Hu Tao will deal tons of damage. In the last slot, obviously the standard Sucrose or Kazuha are the best bets for your 4-set Viridescent user. One thing to keep in mind is that we can't infuse the Animo Burst with Pyro or else Hu Tao will lose out on Vaporize hits. The solution to this is either to infuse their Elemental Burst with Xingqiu's Hydro, or simply just don't use their Elemental Burst at all and instead rely on their elemental skills to swirl. And with that, it's time to wrap up the video. This guide was jam-packed with info, but that's a good thing since I really wanted to put out one of the best Hu Tao guides for both veteran and newer players. With that being said, if you enjoyed this guide or thought it was useful, be sure to support both the video and the channel. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.